Welcome to the Kingdom of Azura. It's a special place where the sunsets are beautiful and the people are kind. The kingdom is surrounded by a big river and a magical forest. The people of Azura are brave, wise, and friendly. They choose their leaders carefully, making sure they are fair and good. It is a wonderful place. Damalola was a young African girl who lived in a small village surrounded by lush green forests and winding rivers. She had big brown eyes and curly black hair that bounced with every step. Damalola's parents, Ade and Neoma, loved her dearly, but fate had other plans. Tragedy struck when Damalola was just a toddler. Her parents died in a terrible accident, leaving her all alone. The village elders took her in, but she was soon sent to live with her aunt, Aya Agba, in a nearby town. Aya Agba was a kind woman with 3 children of her own, 2 girls, Yinka and Kemi, and a boy, Tund. They welcomed Damalola with open arms, and she quickly became part of the family. Despite the love and care, Damalola often felt like an outsider. She missed her parents dearly and longed for the comfort of her real family. Aya Agba tried her best to fill the void, but the ache in Damalola's heart remained. As she grew older, Damalola began to notice the differences between her and her cousins. They had a mother and father who loved them, while she had to rely on her aunt's kindness. This realization sparked a fire within her, a desire to prove herself and make her parents proud, even if they weren't there to see it. Little did Damalola know, her life was about to take a dramatic turn, setting her on a path that would change her destiny forever. Damalola settled into her new life with Aya Agba and her children. They lived in a cozy little house on the outskirts of the town, surrounded by mango trees and vibrant flowers. Aya Agba worked tirelessly to provide for her family, selling beautiful handmade crafts at the local market. Yinka, Kemi, and Tund were Damalola's new siblings, and they did their best to make her feel welcome. Yinka, the eldest, was kind and gentle, always looking out for Damalola. Kemi, on the other hand, was a bit mischievous, loving to play pranks on her siblings. Tund, the youngest, was a ball of energy, always getting into trouble. Despite their differences, the children grew close, sharing stories and secrets. Damalola felt a sense of belonging, but the ache in her heart still lingered. She longed to know more about her parents and the life she left behind. Aya Agba noticed Damalola's curiosity and began sharing stories about her parents. She told her about Ade's bravery and Neoma's kindness. Damalola's eyes sparkled with pride, and for the first time, she felt a sense of connection to her roots. As the days turned into weeks, Damalola grew stronger, her smile brighter. She started helping Aya Agba with her crafts, learning the intricate patterns and colors of their culture. The villagers began to notice the young girl's talent, and soon, she was in high demand. In the nearby kingdom, a sense of urgency filled the air. King Obafemi, the mighty ruler, was in search of a solution to an ancient curse. The kingdom's tradition dictated that the king's firstborn son would inherit the throne, but a mysterious prophecy foretold that if the king's first child was a girl, the king would meet his demise. King Obafemi, desperate to secure his legacy, sought a way to ensure a male heir. His advisors, wise men and women, searched far and wide for a solution. They discovered an ancient ritual, hidden deep within the kingdom's archives, which promised to guarantee a male child. The ritual required a special name, given to the king by the gods, to be spoken aloud. The one who spoke the name would bear the king's first son, the future heir to the throne. But there was a catch: the king's middle name was unknown. Neither the chief priest nor the parents of the king knew his middle name, since it was given to him by the gods themselves. A grand announcement was made, calling upon the people of the kingdom and beyond to gather and attempt to guess the king's middle name. The one who succeeded would be granted the honor of bearing the king's first son. Aya Agba, Damilola's aunt, heard the news and whispered a prayer, hoping that her own children would have a chance at the throne. Damilola, now settled in her new life, began to experience strange and vivid dreams. One night, she dreamed of living in a grand palace, surrounded by wealth and power. She saw herself wearing beautiful clothes and jewelry, with people bowing down to her. The dream felt so real that she woke up with a start, her heart racing. Excited by the prospect of a better life, Damilola shared her dream with Aya Agba and her cousins. They listened with a mixture of amusement and skepticism, but Damilola couldn't shake off the feeling that something was about to change. Aya Agba, though loving and kind, had grown increasingly jealous of Damilola's presence in their lives. She began to wonder if Damilola's dream was a sign of good fortune or a threat to her own children's chances at the throne. As the days passed, Damilola's dreams continued, each one more vivid and detailed than the last. She saw herself standing beside a powerful king, with a crown on her head and a scepter in her hand. The dreams left her feeling both thrilled and terrified, unsure of what the future held. Meanwhile, the kingdom's preparations for the grand gathering were in full swing. People from far and wide were arriving, each hoping to guess the king's middle name and secure a place in history. Aya Agba, determined to see her own children succeed, began to make plans for their attendance. Aya Agba's mind raced with thoughts of Damilola's dreams and the upcoming gathering. She couldn't shake off the feeling that Damilola's presence was a threat to her own children's chances at the throne. Her jealousy grew, and she began to distance herself from Damilola, no longer sharing stories or secrets with her. One day, while Damilola was out helping with the crafts, Aya Agba called her children aside and whispered a plan. "We must ensure that Damilola doesn't attend the gathering," she said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Her dreams are a sign of her ambition, and we can't let her get in our way." Yinka, Kemi, and Tund exchanged uneasy glances, but Aya Agba's words struck a chord. They began to see Damilola as a rival, and their once warm relationship started to fray. As the day of the gathering approached, Aya Agba's schemes intensified. She made sure Damilola was kept busy with chores, hoping to distract her from the event. But Damilola's heart remained fixed on the dreams, and she longed to attend the gathering, unaware of the danger that lurked ahead. The day of the grand gathering finally arrived, and the kingdom was abuzz with excitement. People from far and wide had come to attempt to guess the king's middle name, each hoping to secure a place in history. Aya Agba and her children, dressed in their finest attire, joined the throngs of people making their way to the grand hall. Damilola, however, was nowhere to be seen. Aya Agba had made sure she was kept busy with chores, hoping to keep her away from the gathering. But Damilola's heart remained fixed on her dreams, and she longed to attend, unaware of the danger that lurked ahead. As the crowd gathered, King Obafemi took his place on the throne, flanked by his advisors. The rules of the gathering were simple: each person would have one chance to guess the king's middle name. If they succeeded, they would bear the king's first son, the future heir to the throne. The first participant stepped forward, a confident look on. "The king's middle name is Alua." The crowd held its collective breath as the king shook his head, a hint of a smile on his lips. "Wrong," he said, his voice firm but kind. And so, the gathering continued, each participant trying their luck. But as the day wore on, it became clear that something was amiss. A strange, unsettling energy hung in the air, and Damilola's absence seemed more and more ominous. As the gathering continued, Aya Agba's children, Yinka, Kemi, took their turns attempting to guess the king's middle name. Each of them tried their best, but their efforts were met with failure. The king's expression remained kind, but his eyes seemed to hold a hint of concern. Meanwhile, Damilola's absence had become increasingly noticeable. She had always been fascinated by the stories of the kingdom and its traditions. Her dreams had hinted at a connection to the throne, and her curiosity had been piqued. So, where was she? Aya Agba tried to brush off the feeling of unease, focusing on her children's attempts to guess the king's middle name. But as the day wore on, she couldn't shake off the sense that something was amiss. Damilola's absence felt like a storm cloud on the horizon, threatening to disrupt the entire gathering. As the sun began to set, the gathering came to a close for the day. The participants would return the next day, each hoping to succeed where they had failed today. Aya Agba and her children made their way back home, their minds preoccupied with thoughts of Damalola and the mysterious energy that lingered in the air. When Aya Agba and her children woke up, they were surprised to see Damalola already dressed and ready to go. She had been persistent in her desire to attend the gathering, and Aya Agba had finally relented. But as they prepared to leave, Aya Agba's expression turned cunning. "Damalola, come here," she said, her voice laced with a hint of deceit. "I want to give you something to help you today." Damalola approached, unsuspecting, as Aya Agba handed her a red scarf. "Tie your hair with this," she instructed. "It will bring you good luck." But as soon as Damalola tied the scarf around her head, she felt a strange sensation wash over her. Her mind began to cloud, and her thoughts became disjointed. Aya Agba's children exchanged worried glances, realizing too late what their mother had done. "Damalola, what's wrong?" Yinka asked, concern etched on her face. But Damalola just stared blankly, her eyes unfocused. She was under the influence of Aya Agba's African juju, her mind controlled by the red scarf. "Let's go," Aya Agba said, her voice cold and calculating. "We don't want to be late." As they left for the gathering, Damalola followed, her movements mechanical and her mind trapped in a haze of confusion. She made Damalola mad out of jealousy. Aya Agba's eyes narrowed as she realized that Damalola was still able to speak, even under the influence of the juju. Her plan had been to render Damalola helpless, but it seemed that the young girl's spirit was stronger than she had anticipated. With a swift motion, Aya Agba reached into her bag of tricks and pulled out a small vial of dark liquid. She threw it at Damalola, who felt a searing pain as the liquid enveloped her body. As the transformation took hold, Damalola's body began to contort and twist, her limbs shortening and her skin turning to scales. Her mind was foggy, but she was aware of what was happening. She was turning into a snake. Aya Agba's eyes gleamed with malice as she gazed upon the snake that was once Damalola. "Now, let us see how you will mention the king's name," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. The snake, still bearing a glimmer of Damalola's consciousness, slithered away from Aya Agba's feet and into the unknown, roaming the streets in search of refuge. As the snake navigated the crowded marketplaces and winding alleys, it encountered various dangers, from hungry birds to treacherous terrain. But it persevered, driven by a spark of determination that refused to be extinguished. Aya Agba and her children finally arrived at the grand hall, where the gathering was in full swing. The atmosphere was electric, with people from all walks of life eager to guess the king's middle name. As they took their place in the crowd, Aya Agba's children, Yinka, Kem each took turns attempting to guess the name. But no matter how hard they tried, their efforts were met with failure. The king's expression remained kind, but his eyes seemed to hold a hint of disappointment. As the day wore on, the crowd grew more restless. Many had traveled from far and wide, hoping to secure a place in history by guessing the king's middle name. But as the sun began to set, it became clear that no one had succeeded. Aya Agba's face twisted in frustration. She had been so sure that one of her children would guess the name, but now it seemed that her plan had been foiled. As the crowd began to disperse, she grasped her children's arms, her eyes blazing with determination. "We will not give up," she hissed. "We will find a way to guess that name, no matter what it takes." Just as the crowd was about to disperse, a loud shout echoed through the market square. "Zirachi!" The voice was clear and confident, and it seemed to come from an unexpected source, a snake. The king and the crowd were shocked to see a talking snake, but what happened next left them all in stunned silence. The snake, who was none other than Damalola, began to glow with a soft, golden light. Her body began to transform, and before their very eyes, she became pregnant. The king's eyes widened in amazement as he realized that the snake was carrying his first son, the heir to the throne. The crowd erupted into shock and despair, and Aya Agba's face turned pale with shock and disbelief. "How is this possible?" she whispered to her children, her mind reeling with the implications. the market square was still abuzz with shock and confusion. How could a snake possibly carry the heir to the throne? The villagers looked at each other in disbelief, wondering if they had heard the king correctly. Just then, the village chief priest stepped forward, his face grave with concern. "This mystery must be solved," he declared, his voice echoing through the square. "If the snake gives birth to a snake, our kingdom will be ruled by a snake. We cannot allow this to happen." The crowd gasped in horror, the implications sinking in. A snake as their ruler? It was unthinkable. The king's face was etched with worry, and even Aya Agba's expression had changed from shock to fear. The chief priest continued, "We must find a way to break the curse that has been cast upon Damalola. We must restore her to her human form before it's too late." "But how?" The villagers looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The kingdom was on the brink of a crisis, and time was running out. The fate of their kingdom hung in the balance, and the solution seemed as elusive as ever. The snake, still carrying the king's first son, was carefully taken to the palace by a professional snake handler. The palace was buzzing with activity as everyone tried to figure out what to do next. The king, and all the advisors were worried and confused. They had never seen anything like this before. Just then, the chief priest, a wise and respected man, was called to the palace to help find a solution. He was known for his knowledge of ancient traditions and magic. The king and his advisors hoped that he could help them break the curse and turn Damalola back into a human. The chief priest listened carefully to the story and examined the snake. He thought for a long time, his face scrunched up in concentration. Finally, he spoke, "My dear king, I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that I know how to break the curse. The bad news is that it won't be easy." The king leaned in, eager to hear the solution. "What do we need to do?" the king asked. "The only way to break the curse," the chief priest said, "is to retrieve an egg from a mysterious tree deep in the forbidden evil forest." The room fell silent. Everyone knew about the forbidden evil forest. It was a place where no one had ever returned from. The forest was said to be full of scary creatures, poisonous plants, and treacherous paths. Many brave warriors had ventured in, but none had come back to tell the tale. The king and the advisors looked at each other nervously. Who would be brave enough to go on this dangerous quest? The chief priest continued, "The mysterious tree is said to have the power to reverse any curse. But it's guarded by fierce creatures and enchanted plants. We need someone who is brave, clever, and strong to retrieve the egg." The room was quiet for a long time. Everyone was thinking about who could possibly go on this quest. The king, desperate to find a solution, stood up and addressed the room. "I promise to give anyone who can retrieve the egg from the mysterious tree tons of gold and silver. They will be rich beyond their wildest dreams," he exclaimed. The room was silent. No one dared to speak up. The king's advisors looked at each other nervously, but no one volunteered for the quest. The king, not deterred, added more incentives. "Not only will you receive gold and silver, but you will also be granted a piece of land, a grand house, and a title of honor. You will be celebrated as a hero throughout the kingdom." Still, no one dared to step forward. The king's advisors looked at each other, but no one was willing to take on the dangerous quest. No one in the village dared to go. The king, growing frustrated, turned to the chief priest. "Why won't anyone volunteer? Don't they want to be rich and famous?" The chief priest shook his head. "Your Majesty, it's not that simple. The forbidden evil forest is a place of great danger. Many brave warriors have ventured in, but none have returned. It's not just a matter of being rich or famous, it's a matter of life and death." The king scowled. "I don't care. I'll command someone to go." The chief priest held up his hand. "No, Your Majesty. That's not the way. The person who goes on this quest must do so of their own free will. No one should be forced to face such danger against their will." The king grumbled, but he knew the chief priest was right. He couldn't force someone to risk their life, no matter how much he wanted to break the curse. And so, the king's promise remained unclaimed. The room was silent, and the quest for the mysterious egg seemed impossible. The king's promise remained unclaimed, and the room was silent. No one dared to take on the dangerous quest to retrieve the mysterious egg. The king's advisors looked at each other nervously, but no one was willing to risk their life. The king, feeling frustrated and desperate, made a brave decision. "I'll go myself," he exclaimed. "I can't force anyone to risk their life, but I can't just sit here and do nothing either." The room was shocked. The king's advisors tried to persuade him to change his mind, but he was determined. He knew it was a risky decision, but he was willing to do whatever it took to break the curse and save Damalola. Before he set out on his journey, the king visited his mother's grave. He knelt down and spoke to her, telling her about the deadly battle he was about to fight. "Mother, I know you always wanted me to be brave and strong. I'm going to face the forbidden evil forest and retrieve the egg from the mysterious tree. I'm scared, but I know I have to do this." As he spoke, a sharp, extremely sword appeared on top of the grave. The king was amazed and grateful. "Thank you, mother," he said, taking the sword. "I'll use this to protect myself and bring back the egg." Next, the king visited his father's grave. He spoke to him, telling him about his decision to face the forest. "Father, I know you tried to retrieve the egg before, but you didn't succeed. I'm scared, but I have to try. Please help me." As he spoke, a bracelet known as the Brace of Wisdom appeared on top of the grave. The king took it and wore it on his wrist. He felt a surge of wisdom and courage flow through him. The king was scared, knowing that his parents had lost their lives trying to retrieve the egg. But he was determined to succeed where they had failed. He took a deep breath, said goodbye to his advisors, and set out on his journey to the forbidden evil forest. As the king set out on his journey to the forbidden evil forest, the chief priest smiled to himself, knowing that his evil plans were finally coming together. He had been bribed by Damalola's aunt, who had offered him a one-night stand in exchange for his deceit. The chief priest had pretended to help the king, but in reality, he had been leading him into a trap. The truth was that there were simpler means to restore Damalola to her human form, but the chief priest had concealed this information from the king. Damalola's aunt had a secret motive for wanting the king to fail. She knew that if Damalola was restored, a great calamity would befall her, and she would lose her power and influence in the kingdom. The chief priest, filled with greed and malice, had agreed to help Damalola's aunt in her evil plan. He had pretended to be a wise and trusted advisor, but in reality, he was a deceitful and cunning man. Not even 10 hours had passed since the king's departure when the chief priest made a shocking announcement. "The king has died in the forest," he exclaimed, his voice dripping with false sorrow. "He was brave, but the forest was too treacherous. We must prepare for his funeral and mourn his loss." The kingdom was in shock. The king's advisors were grief-stricken, and the people of the kingdom were devastated. But little did they know, the king was still alive, facing the dangers of the forest, unaware of the evil plans that had been set in motion against him. The chief priest's announcement was a clever ruse, designed to throw the kingdom into chaos and confusion. He knew that the king would not survive the forest, and he had planned everything carefully to ensure that Damalola's aunt would maintain her power and influence in the kingdom. The kingdom was in a state of shock and grief. The king's advisors and subjects were all mourning the loss of their beloved leader. They had believed the chief priest's announcement that the king had died in the forest, and they were preparing for his funeral. A date was fixed for the burial, and the kingdom was filled with sorrow and despair. Damalola's aunt was pretending to be grief-stricken, but in reality, she was secretly celebrating the king's demise. She knew that with the king out of the way, she would have more power and influence in the kingdom. Meanwhile, the king was still alive, facing the dangers of the forest. He had been walking for hours, and he was getting tired and hungry. He had been following a narrow path, and suddenly, he came across an entrance that made his blood run cold. The sign above the entrance read, "Rest in pieces." The king was terrified, but he knew he had no choice. He had to press on if he wanted to retrieve the mysterious egg and break the curse. He took a deep breath and stepped through the entrance. As soon as he did, he felt like he had entered a different world. Everything looked and felt different. The wind was howling, the land was shaking, the trees were swaying, and the air was thick with an eerie fog. The king could hear the sound of birds chirping, but it was a strange, unsettling sound. Even the water he drank from a nearby stream tasted bitter and unpleasant. It was as if the entire environment was against him. The king knew he had to be brave and strong if he wanted to survive. He drew his sword and pressed on, determined to overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. As he walked, the king encountered strange and terrifying creatures. There were giant spiders, venomous snakes, and ferocious beasts that seemed to be waiting for him. He fought them off with his sword, but they kept coming back, more fierce and aggressive than before. The king was getting tired and weak, but he refused to give up. He knew that Damalola was counting on him, and he couldn't let her down. He pressed on, his heart pounding in his chest, his sword trembling in his hand. Suddenly, the king heard a loud roar behind him. He turned around to see a massive dragon emerging from the fog. Its eyes were blazing with fire, and its claws were sharp and deadly. The king knew he had to act fast if he wanted to survive. Ape. As the dragon was about to attack, the king suddenly remembered the brace of wisdom he had obtained from his father's grave. He bowed down and said, "Long live the king." To his surprise, the dragon stopped in its tracks and looked at him with a hint of recognition. The king's father had indeed helped the dragon in the past, and the dragon had been waiting for an opportunity to repay the kindness. The king's words triggered the dragon's memory, and it realized that the king was the son of its old friend. Without hesitation, the dragon spoke in a deep, rumbling voice, "You are the son of the king who helped me in my time of need. I will not harm you. Instead, I will help you on your quest." The king was amazed and grateful for the unexpected turn of events. He thanked the dragon and asked for its help in navigating the treacherous pool of demons that lay ahead. The dragon nodded its great head and said, "Follow me, and I will guide you through the pool of demons. But be warned, the journey will be difficult, and you must be brave and clever to succeed." With the dragon's guidance, the king dashed deeper into the pool of demons, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The dragon's fiery breath cleared a path through the demons, and the king followed closely behind, his sword at the ready. The king and the dragon finally reached the River of Blood, a treacherous and ominous crossing point. The dragon, despite its bravery, refused to cross, knowing that the river was home to malevolent spirits and creatures. With a nod, the dragon bid the king farewell, leaving him to face the perilous journey alone. Not even the dragon dared to cross to the other side. The king's heart raced as he stepped into the river, his body covered in goosebumps. The blood-red water was icy cold, and the king could feel the weight of his fear pulling him down. He shivered and trembled, his sword trembling in his hand. As he reached the other side, the king felt a strange sensation, as if he was in a trance. But he wasn't. The air was thick with scary sounds and creatures lurked in every shadow. The king's senses were on high alert, and he knew he had to be cautious. The king was so scared as he danced to the tune of the devil. Suddenly, a woman appeared before him, her face a perfect replica of his mother's. The king's heart swelled with nostalgia, and he felt a sense of comfort wash over him. But, as he looked closer, he noticed something was off. The woman's eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light, and her voice was laced with malice. The king's father's bracelet of wisdom began to shine, and he realized that this was no ordinary woman. She was a demon, sent to deceive and destroy him. With a fierce determination, the king raised his sword, ready to defend himself against the demon's treachery. The demon, taken aback by the king's sudden awareness, snarled and revealed its true form. The king stood firm, his sword flashing in the dim light. The battle was intense, with the king fighting to maintain his sanity and his life. The bracelet of wisdom guided the king's actions, and he managed to fend off the demon's attacks. But the fight was far from over. The king knew he had to be vigilant, for in this treacherous land, deception and danger lurked around every corner. The king continued on his journey, his senses still on high alert after the encounter with the demon. As he walked, he noticed an old woman struggling to carry a heavy load of wood. The king felt a pang of pity for her, but his mind was still reeling from the previous deception. He was hesitant to help, fearing another trap. But then, he felt a strange sensation from the bracelet of wisdom. It was urging him to assist the old woman. The king was torn, wondering if this was another test or a genuine opportunity to help someone in need. After much internal debate, the king decided to trust the bracelet and approached the old woman. He offered to help her carry the heavy load, and together they walked to her destination. When they arrived, the old woman thanked the king profusely and handed him a small, intricately carved mask. The king was perplexed, unsure what to do with it. He pocketed the mask and continued on his journey, unaware of the significance of the gift. Unknown to the king, this was the exact spot where his father had met his demise. His father had also been given the same mask, but he had dismissed it as useless and thrown it away. The king's decision to keep the mask would prove to be a crucial one, but he didn't know it yet. The king pressed on, the mask safely in his possession. He couldn't shake off the feeling that his father's spirit was guiding him, urging him to trust in the wisdom of the bracelet. The king stood at the edge of a vast, demon-infested terrain, the final hurdle before reaching the mystical tree. He knew he couldn't pass through without being detected, and his heart raced with anxiety. That's when he remembered the mask the old woman had given him. With a surge of hope, the king put on the mask, praying it would work as a disguise. He took a deep breath and stepped into the demon-filled landscape, trying to mimic their movements and appearance. The king's heart pounded in his chest as he navigated through the treacherous terrain. He was almost caught several times, but he managed to evade detection by a hair's breadth. The mask seemed to be working, but he knew it was only a matter of time before he was discovered. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the king reached the base of the magnificent tree. Its trunk was unlike anything he had ever seen, with glowing symbols and markings that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. The king's eyes widened in awe as he gazed up at the tree's towering height, its branches stretching towards the sky like giant arms. The king's hand closed around the egg, and he knew he had to act fast. He had anticipated that touching the egg would trigger a massive attack, and he was right. The moment he plucked it from the tree, the forest erupted into chaos. Demons, creatures, and even the trees themselves seemed to come alive, determined to stop the king from escaping. But the king was prepared. With the egg clutched tightly in his hand, he turned and ran, his feet pounding the earth as he dashed towards the safety of the forest's edge. The dragon, sensing the king's peril, appeared once more, its fiery breath clearing a path through the onslaught of attacks. Together, the king and the dragon fought their way through the treacherous landscape, the king's sword flashing in the sunlight as he battled against the forces of darkness. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the edge of the forest, and the king saw the glimmer of light that marked the exit. With a final burst of energy, he sprinted towards the opening, the dragon bid him farewell. As he emerged from the forest, the king felt a sense of triumph and relief wash over him. He had done the impossible. The king, still holding the mysterious egg, emerged from the forest and made his way back to his kingdom. As he approached the castle, he was met with a shocking sight. His people were gathered in the courtyard, dressed in mourning attire, and a large funeral pyre stood in the center, adorned with flowers and tributes. The king's jaw dropped as he realized they were celebrating his own funeral. He had been gone for so long, and the chief priest's deceitful announcement had led his people to believe he had perished in the forest. As the king entered the courtyard, the crowd gasped in terror, thinking he was a ghost or a spirit risen from the dead. They trembled with fear, unsure what to make of the king's sudden reappearance. The king's advisors and guards, who had been complicit in the chief priest's scheme, cowered in shame, knowing they had been deceived and had wronged their rightful ruler. The king's return was met with a mix of shock, fear, and confusion. He stood tall, his presence commanding attention, as he gazed upon the scene before him. He knew he had to act swiftly to restore order and reclaim his rightful place on the throne. With a firm voice, the king declared, "I am not a ghost, but your true king, returned to claim my rightful place." let us put an end to this charade and work together to rebuild our kingdom." The crowd, still in awe, began to murmur among themselves, unsure what to make of the king's sudden return. The king's convincing words and the mysterious egg's power finally won over the hearts of his people. The king, with the mysterious egg in hand, approached Damilola's chamber, his heart filled with hope and determination. He had finally uncovered the truth behind her curse and was ready to restore her to her true form. The egg, pulsing with an otherworldly energy, seemed to sense the king's resolve and glowed brighter, as if urging him on. As he entered the chamber, the king was met with a sight that broke his heart. Damilola, once a vibrant and beautiful girl, now lay on her bed, her body twisted and contorted in ways that seemed humanly impossible. Her skin was deathly pale, and her eyes, once bright and full of life, had dulled to a mere sparkle. The king's advisors and guards, who had been loyal to the chief priest and Damilola's aunt, stood frozen in shame, unable to meet the king's gaze. They knew they had been deceived and had played a part in the Damilola's downfall. With a gentle touch, the king placed the egg on Damilola's chest, and instantly, a warm, golden light enveloped her body. The egg began to glow even brighter, and the king could feel its energy coursing through the air. Slowly but surely, Damilola's body began to transform. Her twisted limbs straightened, and her skin regained its natural radiance. Her eyes, once dull and lifeless, sparkled with a newfound light, and a soft, gentle smile spread across her face. The king, overjoyed at the sight of Damilola's restoration, felt a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over him. As Damilola sat up, her eyes locking onto the king's, a look of confusion and wonder crossed her face. She seemed to be trying to remember something, but her memories were hazy and unclear. The king, with a gentle touch, helped Damilola to her feet, and she stood, unsteadily at first, but gradually gaining strength and confidence. He led her to a mirror, and as she gazed upon her reflection, a gasp of shock and amazement escaped her lips. Her eyes widened as she took in her new form, her beauty and grace restored to their former glory. Tears of joy and gratitude streamed down her face as she turned to the king, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, my king," she said, her words trembling with emotion. "Thank you for saving me from the darkness that had consumed me." The king, his heart overflowing with love and happiness, embraced Damilola, holding her close as tears of joy streamed down his face. The kingdom was abuzz with excitement as the day of the grand wedding ceremony between Damilola and the king finally arrived. The entire realm was filled with joy and anticipation, eager to witness the union of their beloved monarch and his restored girl. The ceremony was held in the grand courtyard of the palace, beautifully decorated with flowers, ribbons, and golden tapestries. The sun shone brightly overhead, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. He took her hand, and together they faced the high priest, who began the ancient ritual of matrimony. The ceremony was a beautiful blend of traditional customs and heartfelt vows, with the king and Damilola exchanging rings and promising to love and cherish each other for all eternity. The air was filled with the sweet scent of incense and the soft murmur of blessings from the gathered crowd. As the high priest pronounced them husband and wife, the kingdom erupted in cheers and applause, with tears of joy streaming down the faces of the guests. The king and Damilola shared a tender kiss, sealing their love forever. The reception that followed was a grand affair, with feasting, music, and dancing that lasted long into the night. The king and Damilola were showered with gifts and blessings from their subjects, who rejoiced at the union of their beloved monarch and his princess. As the night wore on, the king and Damilola took to the dance floor, their love shining brighter than any star in the night sky. They swayed to the music, lost in each other's eyes, their happiness infectious and palpable. And so, the kingdom celebrated the union of their king and Damilola, a love that had conquered all obstacles and would forever be the guiding light of their realm. The grand wedding ceremony was etched in the memories of all who attended, a testament to the power of true love and devotion. They hailed him as a hero who had defeated death itself, and his return was celebrated with grand festivities. With the truth finally revealed, Damilola's aunt and the chief priest were exposed for their treachery. They both ran mad and was roaming around the streets, talking to the wind. And Damalola, now fully restored, bore the king a child, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. The kingdom flourished once more, and the king's wisdom and justice ruled the land. As the years passed, the kingdom flourished under the wise and just rule of the king and his beloved queen, Damalola. Their love continued to grow stronger with each passing day, and they were blessed with a handsome young prince, who brought immense joy to the entire realm. The prince, named Prince Arin, grew up surrounded by the love and adoration of his parents and the entire kingdom. He was a bright and curious child, with a mop of curly hair and piercing brown eyes that sparkled with mischief. As he grew older, Prince Arin became increasingly fascinated with the stories of his father's bravery and adventures. He would spend hours listening to the king's tales of the forest and the mysterious egg, his eyes wide with wonder and excitement. The king and queen ensured that their son received the best education and training, surrounded by the wisest scholars and most skilled warriors in the land. Prince Arin proved to be a quick learner, mastering the arts of combat, diplomacy, and leadership with ease. As he entered his teenage years, Prince Arin began to resemble his father more and more, with broad shoulders, a strong jawline, and a charming smile that could disarm even the most skeptical of hearts. His parents couldn't help but feel proud of the fine young man he was becoming. The kingdom's people adored Prince Arin, and he spent much of his time among them, learning about their lives and struggles, and offering help and support wherever he could. He was kind, compassionate, and fair, with a natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life. As the prince grew into a handsome young man, the kingdom began to look forward to the day when he would ascend to the throne, knowing that he would continue his father's legacy of wisdom, courage, and love. The king and queen knew that their son was destined for greatness, and they were grateful to have him as their heir. Meanwhile, the chief priest and Damalola's aunt, still roaming the streets, mad and forlorn, would often catch glimpses of the prince, and their minds would be flooded with memories of their past treachery. They would shake their heads, muttering to themselves, a stark reminder of the consequences of their evil deeds. The kingdom, however, was focused on the future, with Prince Arin at its helm, ready to lead the realm into a new era of peace, prosperity, and happiness. The king and queen looked on, proud and content, knowing that their love had created a bright and promising future for their people. The king's bravery and determination inspire us to stand up against evil and fight for what is right. The consequences of Damalola's aunt and the chief priest serve as a reminder of the dangers of greed, ambition, and the importance of integrity. Ultimately, the story shows that with courage, wisdom, and the power of good, we can overcome even the darkest of challenges.